My name is Lisa, and it's really personal to me because I lost my daughter January the 2nd of 2018. She will forever be 26. She battled with addiction most of her teenage life. Um, would never admit she had a problem. She was always clean. Um, I try to talk to anybody that'll listen and that I know suffering to try to help them. I don't have the answers or know how to help, but I know that you can love them and hold them through it and make them accountable. She left behind a beautiful little girl who's now 9 years old, who I'm watching play ball. Um, she never got the opportunity to know who her mother was because she came to see her when she wanted to. How it hurts the people that loves them is as much as it hurts the ones that are going through the addiction. And I want people to know that it's not, we don't look down on you for having a problem. Just say you need help and we'll hold your hand through it. But don't leave your kids behind and your mother behind, whose heart will never heal. I'm sorry, I promised I wouldn't cry.
You're fine. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, Polly, will you introduce yourself and share a little bit why talking about this is important to you?
Yes, I will. Can everybody hear me okay? I think it's really important that we meet like this and we all get the chance to share information and talk with each other. I'm an overdose survivor. I'm also a certified peer recovery specialist. I've worked in the field for 7 years now, and the last 2.5 years I've been a recovery navigator with the crisis team. And right now we're not physically in the hospitals because of COVID, but we've managed to do our job through telemed. But my job primarily consists of visiting people who have survived an overdose in the hospital, and then I refer them for treatment, whatever it is that they need. And I'll speak later on stigma, but that's sort of been the topic of the week for me. And I think that it's important that we talk about this in order to decrease the stigma so that the still suffering addict is not going to be ashamed when they finally do ask for help, that one of us has our hands out, so I appreciate y'all letting me be here tonight.
Thank you, Polly. Rachel, will you share who you are and why this is important for you?
Yes. I'm Rachel Roden. I'm the coordinator for the 1st Judicial District Felony Recovery Court, employed by Families Free. And it's important for me, just like Kim had mentioned, it's pretty personal. Lost a family member to overdose when I was in high school, and just kind of have a passion for helping people.
Thank you. I think Scott Vaughn is with us. Maybe. Scott, if you're here, will you share who you are and why talking about overdose is important?
Yeah, sorry for being late. The reason I'm here to talk about addiction and talk about overdose prevention is because I'm in long-term recovery. Also, I'm an ordained minister, so I like to approach things from sort of not necessarily always a faith-based means, but also work with people kind of where they are as an ordained minister.
Thank you for being here. All right, and last but not least, Sherry Barnett, share who you are and why talking about overdose is important to you.
Well, I think I can tell you that Miss Lisa is probably, it is personal for me, but Miss Lisa and her daughter are probably why I do what I do and partner with all the coalitions. My name is Sherry Barnett. I am the Regional Overdose Prevention Specialist for the state of Tennessee in Region 1. I'm also a harm reduction activist. I partner with Julian and all the other coalitions to teach Narcan and overdose awareness. My journey has went from everything to losing everything, going to prison and coming back and getting my license back, to practice as a nurse practitioner. I'm also a certified peer recovery specialist, and I sit on the board at ETSU in advisement of their nurse practitioners who work in the field of opioid substance use disorder, so that they can learn that we are real. Elizabeth Hart taught me one time, who is a phenomenal person that I connect with from the Tennessee Department of Health. If you have anything to say, try to keep speaking points. And my speaking point is, just like Lisa said, every single life is valuable. And even though we may see that addict, that person in substance use disorder, it is my mission, along with all of you guys, and that's why you're here, is to keep people healthy and alive until they can find long-term recovery. And though it's not easy, and we know that it can be done, we want to hold hands. We want to make ourselves visible and let people know that we do recover and that we do lead productive lives. So my goal is to finish, to get back in school and finish my doctorate and be a primary mental health nurse and work in addiction for the rest of my life. So
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks to everybody for being here. So just real quick, little housekeeping thing. I'm going to share just a little bit about the way this will work. We have some specific questions that we're going to ask the panelists. Feel free to use the chat box during this whole time. Any questions you have, anything that you want them to talk about or want to know more about, please feel free to do that. And we are going to ask folks to stay muted, though, until the very end. We'll get through all of the sort of pre-planned questions, and then at the end we'll have some time for anything else that comes up that they aren't or that they haven't covered. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with Craig. Craig, will you share some of the common needs that maybe prevent folks from getting the help they need, things that aren't always available to them, or resources that you see as great needs in the community?
Thank you all for having me. And I'm sorry about my camera. I was not good with Zoom, and I had it facing the other way. So I probably did y'all a favor not having to see my face on that first one. But I'm gonna butt in on why overdose awareness is important to me. When I was growing up, one of my best friends who helped mold the man that I am today died of an overdose of cocaine and morphine. And I can look on my Facebook friends list right now, and there's probably 75 to 100 people that I've been friends with over the years that have died from either drug addiction or suicide from a direct result of drug addiction. And I want to sing Sherry's praises for just a second, because Sherry is the local person over Narcan. And in the last 2 months, two of my best friends growing up didn't have to die because they had access to Narcan. And I really want to thank Sherry for doing that, because those people mean the world to me. I love them like brothers. And that one of those people saved my life from an overdose years ago. So I want to thank Sherry for that. And as far as the needs that people need in the community, and this sounds crazy to a lot of the people in this chat, because a lot of us are very involved in the recovery community. I think maybe the biggest need is we don't have all the information out there. Like, we think everybody knows, hey, you can go to treatment at Magnolia Ridge, or hey, there's an MAT clinic here, or hey, if your mental health is bad, you can get into the Woodridge. And I think we think that's common knowledge. And I talked to somebody last night that had no clue that any of that existed. So as much as it's common knowledge to us, to average Joe public, I'm not sure that we get that information out there to them. Now, once they get into treatment and we can get them stable and help, there's a lot of organizations that, once again, people don't know the information about, whether it's the local Oxford houses, the sober living houses, and a lot of times it's especially for women, it's how to deal with the family. You know, like a lot of younger women come in, the obstacles in their path, or how do I go about being a mother? And I know in my personal life, in recovery, sorry, my neighbor's dog is crazy, but in my own personal life, I had to have a lot of people teach me how to be a man. And I was blessed that I got involved in a 12-step fellowship, and I had a lot of people show me along the way how to get a job, how to take care of my finances. You know, because the people that are coming in that need help from drug addiction, most of us have tanked everything in our lives, whether it's, you know, our family relationships, our finances, our mental health, our hygiene, and a lot of us need love, but a lot of us also need someone to tell us the truth. And the truth is the way that we've been living, it isn't really working for us. And I had a lot of well-meaning people for a lot of years coddle me and tell me everything was going to be okay. And I never got much better till somebody was willing to say, look at what you're doing to yourself. Look at what you're doing to your family. And I knew he'd been there before, and he said, I can help you not have to live that life anymore. And I think one of the things that we can do most for our community is be the example. You know, watch somebody's feet. And if their feet are taking actions that's going to make the community better, I'm more likely to follow them rather than listening to their words about how they talk about what they do. Show me what you're doing. And by that example, I'm like, I will follow you into battle. And I had some people that showed me that example, and I followed them into battle, and my life has been exponentially better ever since. So I hope that answers the question to some degree.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Anybody else on the panel have comments about common needs in the community that you see?
Some common needs, this is Kim Crowder. I know we can't all see each other. Some common needs and some common barriers to those needs are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual barriers. For instance, access to appropriate medical and dental treatment, that factors in to getting recovery. If your mouth is in intense pain and you don't have the means or the access to affordable dental care, you know how to make that pain stop. If you have any chronic medical illness and no access to appropriate treatment, that is a barrier, right? Craig is right. Not everybody has the info, but also there aren't all the services we need either. Another barrier is untreated mental illness and access to appropriate mental health help, be that therapy, appropriate medication, inpatient stays, and of course, all the other things, but appropriate housing, food, jobs, transportation. Let's say there's plenty of resources for a person and no way for him or her to get there, right? So there are many, many barriers. Sure, there are a lot of people working in what we call silos, doing lots of work, offering lots of options, but bridging the gap between the person who needs it and where it is, that's part of the issue right there.
Thank you, Kim. Anyone else? Okay, we will move on. Sorry,
sorry, Jillian. To echo what Kim says, if you go and talk to the people in the treatment centers or the people in the MAT clinics, and you ask them what is the biggest area of need, number one is going to be transportation. 2 is going to be housing. 3 is going to be jobs. And I've done work in the treatment centers for 5.5 years, and it never fails. Those are the biggest areas of needs. And I don't know of anyone really around here that's got the transportation thing figured out. We've got some people that do housing decently, pretty well, and we've got some programs to get people jobs. The transportation thing is we're lacking, and I don't have a good solution. I hope someone comes up with one, but that's probably one of the biggest areas that we could all do better on.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, so moving on to number 2, we're going to go back to Kim Crowder. Will you talk a little bit about trauma and the way that trauma can contribute to substance misuse or even overdose in some cases?
Absolutely. In a general way, if you're on this call, you may or may not already know about the ACEs study, which was performed in 2 ways. And ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Events, okay? Kaiser Permanente in 1995 and in 1997 in 2 waves collected data on a variety of adverse events that a person might experience from age 0 to 18, okay? These events were sometimes physical in their nature, such as being beaten or sexual abuse, could also include verbal and emotional abuse, neglect of all varieties, separation from a caregiver, such as through divorce or incarceration, or witnessing events, such as seeing a parent beaten or murdered. Since that time, there's an expanded ACEs version that includes such things as bullying, or the Philadelphia ACEs study. The whole point of it was, though, that Kaiser Permanente wanted to figure out why their employees were sick. These were all people who were professionals, had college educations, were doing well, and very sick. And so they sent out this survey, right? I don't know whose research shot in the dark it was, but it paid off. And so they collected this data, 17,000 pieces of data that's been replicated over and over. It's a huge longitudinal study. And if you're interested in looking at that, go online, go to aces2high.com and look at what's correlated for number 1, 2, 3, 4 plus, 8 plus. You can have 10 ACEs based on the original survey. And what does that mean? Well, shortened lifespans, suicide rates that are higher than average, addiction and alcoholism rates that are higher than average, COPD rates higher than average, and even things like diabetes. So physical, mental illness, and other forms of dysfunction. So trauma. First of all, trauma is as trauma does. If you think you've been traumatized, you have been. Unfortunately, in Appalachia, and I am a native Appalachian, so I say what I want to about it. I was born in Irwin. I grew up in Kingsport. I got a bachelor's degree an hour up the road and a master's 20 minutes down the road, and I live here. And our culture is violent. And if that offends you, I apologize. No, I don't apologize. Our culture is violent. Verbally, physically. Talk to a DCS worker sometime. Maybe we have some of them on this call. Our culture is violent, and violence begets violence. And what happens is, if you are in the early stages of your development, witnessing and or experiencing violence, your brain is being wired by that. My brain was wired by that. Some of your alls perhaps was as well. And so I then have this knot of pain, we'll call it that, and I don't know what to do with it. And what's the quickest, easiest way to numb out? Alcohol, drugs, things like it, right? Some people use food. It's been said that food is the #1 anti-anxiety drug in America right now, but I'm not giving up Doritos anytime soon. Or pals, most likely. So what is the role of trauma? It wires the brain. But besides trauma and adversity, there's another set of factors called resilience, okay? And for many years in the rooms of recovery, I've wondered why some people get it and some people don't. Now, people who aren't really willing to go down the road and talk about anything outside the box, my sponsor told me many years ago, I said, why does so-and-so keep going in and coming out? You know, because I was deluded that it was simply a choice to stick and stay or not, and it's not, okay? Some people are sicker than others and need more assistance. I did. She said that person didn't get enough of the good stuff, and what she meant was there anybody in their life growing up that ever really took care of them and loved them, right? Though I come from an upper middle class home, my ACEs score is an 8. However, My family made sure we had all kinds of opportunities. I had supportive grandparents. I had educational access, piano lessons, all that stuff. Coaches, teachers, youth ministers, okay? Not everybody has that. So lack of resilience plus adversity is a breeding ground, right? A breeding ground for alcoholism and addiction. The good news is, right, that resilience, ACEs can be avoided, number one, right? If you'll note and talk to Jillian sometime about this, Carter County Drug Prevention is very proactive in parenting classes, right? Because how people parent tends to get passed down, right? How people parent tends to get passed down. During this pandemic, DCS's phone is rung off the hook. Violence has gone off the chain during this pandemic. Suicide rates are off the chain during this pandemic. Violence is off the chain during this pandemic. Environmental factors matter. Put a bunch of people in a house on lockdown and add alcohol and you get some violence and trauma. But the role of trauma, well, it's significant. But here's the good news. I can heal with the appropriate care. To also say this, sobriety does not treat trauma, my friends. If you hear me say nuts, Sherry says have speaking points. I'm going to say that one. Sobriety does not treat trauma. That's not what it's intended to do. Sobriety means I haven't had a drink or a drug. I personally required mental health help from a licensed therapist, long-term use of antidepressant medication, plus a spiritual path and spiritual advisement, and many other supports in my life. So one disservice we do to addicts and alcoholics in our recovery community is tell them there's one way and one way only. Some people's abstinence is somebody else's death sentence. I would be a fool to say everybody should do it my way. There are many paths to recovery. It's my goal to make sure everybody knows all the paths all the time. My path might kill you, your path might kill me. So in recovery, we talk about being honest, open-minded, and willing. My sponsor was willing to let the professionals be the professionals and the non-professionals be the non-professionals and share her own journey. So trauma can be prevented. Mental illness can be treated. So I hope that's where you kind of wanted to go with that, Jillian. Does that give you a little bit to go on?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Anybody else on the panel have thoughts about trauma and its impact?
Hey, it's Polly. I would like to piggyback on the trauma stuff because one of the parts of the Navigator program, we actually got a grant from the Victims of Crime Act, where we actually track victimization based on people who overdose in the emergency rooms. And we just wrapped up our second fiscal year. And in Region 1, which is like all the 8 counties, navigators, there's only 3 of us, saw 860 some people. And of those 860 some people, I think around 65% expressed that they had experienced some type of victimization or trauma. I think that number is lower than what it actually is. I think that that's the amount of people that were comfortable enough to say so in that first interaction with me or with a navigator. But, you know, it's suspected that the rate is much, much, much higher than that. So that's something that we are trying to study at least, which I think is good. That'll help us in the future.
Thank you, Polly. Anybody else on the panel have thoughts on trauma? Okay, we'll keep moving. I'm gonna shift it to Lisa again. Will you share just a little bit about your experience as a mama of someone who struggled with substance abuse? Particularly, I would love for you to focus on things that would have been helpful on your journey. How could people have supported you better? Or what would have been helpful for you on this journey? We might have lost her. Okay, I think we did lose her, so we'll come back to her in just a second. So Polly, I'm going to go to you, if that's okay. Will you talk a little bit about stigma? What does stigma mean? Why should we care about stigma? Just talk to us a little bit about stigma.
Yeah, absolutely. Stigma has been, prevalent on my mind for the last couple weeks. I shared my story on an upcoming podcast for the Frontier Health Foundation. Jennifer Teague is doing a recovery podcast, and there's lots of people on here that are going to be future guests too. You can learn more about that at impactstigma.com. And what she's trying to do with that is make it a grassroots movement. Lots of community-based events, people speaking, people sharing. We're breaking the silence, and I'm glad I got to be a part of that. One of the things that I want to just say over and over and over, and most people on this panel know this, but not everybody does, addiction is a disease, and that has been settled by science. It affects us mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, probably financially, a few other ways, but people with addiction continue to be blamed for their disease in our society. And even though it has long been a consensus that it is a complex brain disorder with behavioral components, the public and many in healthcare and even the justice system see it as a moral problem. People continue to think, and I wrote some things down earlier I didn't want to forget to say, but it's powerful to me. People continue to think the alcoholic just can't hold his booze, or if the meth or the heroin user just smashed their pipe and threw away their needle, that they'd be done with it. Unfortunately, there are so many reasons that it's not easy to stop despite negative consequences. The truth is, the addict isn't always the homeless guy under the bridge. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's my father. Sometimes it's my neighbor. Sometimes it's my pastor or my coworker. It can be anybody. Addiction does not discriminate. Removing the stigma and stereotypes allows us to have a reality-based discussion, not opinions, but we use facts when we talk about addiction. Stigma itself, the shame, it actually stops people from seeking treatment because of the fear that they won't be treated with dignity. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the hospital and the person tells me, this isn't like anything personal with our local healthcare system. This is everywhere. It's systemic. But they say that as soon as the nurse found out I was an addict, I got treated differently, or I felt like I got treated differently. I believe that treating people with dignity and grace and compassion is the absolute first step that we have to breaking stigma. I also wanted to talk about something called self-stigmatization, which is something I'm very good at, and I was very good at in the past. And, that means that someone with a mental health diagnosis or an addiction becomes aware of the public opinion of them, and they internalize that to the self. Self-stigmatization was the hardest for me personally to overcome because I felt like, based on my childhood or my parents or my educator or whatever, like this shouldn't be happening to me. The truth was that it was, despite all of those things. I saw myself as the addiction. That was who I became. The never-ending depression was just something that I had to accept, rather than, thinking of myself as a person experiencing a disease or a person experiencing a mental illness. It's so easy for us to say, I'm depressed, rather than I have depression. I'm an addict. To others who are still struggling? Do you believe that some people are beyond help? Do you believe some people are doomed to a life of addiction because of their high risk factors? Do you think some people will simply never get better? Do you believe certain drug treatment approaches are better than others? Do you believe abstinence-based approaches are acceptable and maintenance programs aren't, or vice versa? Do you believe recovery must look a certain way? If you are in recovery, do you judge other people's recovery based on your path? So, you know, in light of that, let's think about some of the internal stigmas we carry that we may not even be aware of, you know, and that's something that's workplace culture too. You know, when a coworker jokingly says, oh, here's that recidivism case, or here's that person that just won't ever get it or whatever, you know, are we doing our part to say, maybe this time it'll be the chance, you know? Craig brought up like access barriers to treatment being, you know, transportation and stuff. And I know like on a daily basis, that's hard, but my program can get people bus tickets to treatment. So even if like they're not my client, let me know if you guys have somebody that needs a bus to treatment, and I'll do what I can, because that's another barrier, you know. All right, thank you for letting me share on that.
Thank you, Polly. Anybody else on the panel have any comments about that?
I think we can all go home now and call it a day. Thank you, Polly.
We're out of here.
Nailed it. We're out of here. That was awesome. I appreciate what Polly said about the root of inventorying my own biases, my own stigma that maybe I don't want to say out loud, those thoughts. You know, when somebody comes back into a program or back into an office or makes that phone call one more time and we're weary, you know, addiction is the only disease you get yelled at for having. I put that in the chat note. It really is. And internalized depression or internalized stigma that Polly's talking about is tied directly to trauma and directly to suicide and overdose rates. Self-hatred and a seed of self-hatred. If there is a seed to addiction and alcoholism, I imagine that might be it. But Polly asked some hard questions, and I'm glad she did. Thanks, Polly.
Thank you, Polly. Anybody else on the panel want to add anything? There's nothing to add. Okay, I'm going to move on to Rachel. Will you talk just a little bit about the First Judicial District Felony Recovery Court and kind of why things like recovery court and therapeutic interventions compared to sort of punitive interventions are so important and so much more effective?
Okay. I am going to share my screen. I've got some PowerPoint slides to kind of go along with my discussion. So first off, I just want to say that without the judges' innovation to bring this program to the First District, it wouldn't happen. Recovery courts can't happen without the judges' input and without their participation. Judge Street are the ones that brought the court into the district, and we accepted our first participant in 2017. Since then, we've opened the first licensed treatment facility in Elizabethton, and then that's also with our existing location in Johnson City, and we've now opened in Johnson County as well an office to help. And I will say that the recovery court is just one aspect of services that Families Free provides. If you do have people that are in need of services, you can go online, familiesfree.com, and anybody can be scheduled for an intake. And then we have also partnered with Recovery Resources, and we're granted the Sequential Intercept Mapping Grant. So we're excited to bring those services to the community as well. So just why recovery courts are important. I got some data from the NADCP.org, and we have reached, for recovery courts, 30 years of evidence-based treatment and success from the programs. And we have over 3,000 courts nationwide right now, serving about 150,000 participants each year, with an average saving of $6,000 per participant and a 58% reduction in recidivism. So that right there tells you why recovery courts are important. And if you not only look at those numbers of people served, the 150,000 per year, you're also affecting those families. And some of the outcomes that we're getting from that, the impact is reduced number in foster care placements, reducing the emergency room visits, reducing arrests and reincarcerations, addressing mental health needs, and delivering services for lifelong recovery by building resiliency in kind of every aspect of their life. So that outreach is not only just reaching that person, but their families as well. So our recovery court team is made up of completely volunteer basis. We couldn't do it without the cohesive team that we have, all the way from the DA's office to the public defender's office. We have community outreach with our bar liaisons to spread the word of the program. Probation sits on our team, along with our treatment and case managers. So I'm just going to kind of go into kind of what recovery court is, the eligibility, and the process of what it is for somebody coming into the program. So program eligibility is completely voluntary. A potential participant must have a felony conviction in the 1st District, which includes Carter County, Washington, Unicoi, and Johnson. They need to identify with a substance abuse problem, and their sentence, the mandatory minimum amount of their sentence, is a 2-year sentence. Because our program is 18 to 24 months, that allows them enough time to go through all of programming and participate. So the referral process, because we pull from the criminal justice system, I have referral forms in all the courtrooms, communicated with a lot of the attorneys of the process. We even have self-referrals where Families Free is in jail classes. I've had several people want to self-refer into the program. So once that happens, then our DA does a NCIC check to make sure that someone is eligible. And to be eligible, you basically can't have any violent offenses. So once that is done, assessment is conducted on them. And then the information, I type that up into a report and send it back to the team. So we assess everybody individually. Our goal is to kind of meet people where they are. So each person is going to have an individual treatment plan developed for them. So the overall goal of our program is to help build resiliency in all areas of their life, addressing their addiction issues as well as mental health. We try to break down the barriers that many people have, such a lot of you have already talked about, transportation and housing. We utilize case management for transportation. We had a contract with NetTrans to offer people rides to group. So we kind of break everything down to where there's not any excuses for someone who's in our program. We even had one from Johnson County. She would ride NetTrans 3 times a week to come down to Elizabethton. And she's recently one of our graduates, so she did really well. Let's see. Then the last thing I have is just kind of a infograph of the program, kind of our expected outcomes, we have different scenarios here of programming. So scenario 1 is someone coming into our program, engaging in all the services that we offer. And so the expected outcome, they graduate from the program, they're going to have improved functioning, a better quality of life. They're going to be a community asset versus a community deficit, improved physical and mental health. We also address healthcare needs, get them connected with Project Access if there's any major medical needs, and Healing Hands, get them connected for Healing Hands for dental issues. And then they would remain on the least restrictive supervision with probation. Scenario number 2, programming is the same for a participant, but then it's later they need more therapeutic programming. So they may need to go to a residential facility like Morgan County and come back to us. Those expected outcomes would remain the same. Scenario number 3, we have someone come in and then they were later terminated. Well, they're still going to get increased knowledge of informal community resources that we offer, and increased self-awareness and knowledge of higher quality of living. And then lastly, scenario number 4, if a participant comes in and later absconds from the program, just decides they don't want to do it, the benefits are still that they get the opportunity to experience the rehabilitative dimension of the criminal justice system. So they still go away with information that is going to help them towards their recovery. I know that's a quick overview of recovery court. That's all I've got.
Hey, Rachel, how do you guys deal with relapses, knowing that it's a part of our disease? And are you guys, do you recognize it as a need for more additional care, or is it almost punishable, or what's the word I'm looking for? How do you all handle that?
So that's a good question. We follow the best practice guidelines, best practice standards, and they look at relapses as non-punitive. So normally it's all on an individual basis. Relapses, we've worked with relapse prevention plans, relapse autopsies, done things to kind of look back and see where that relapse actually started. So we go at it as a non-punitive.
Okay, great. Yes, that was the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the panel have thoughts about the benefit of therapeutic interventions versus consequences or punitive interventions?
Rachel, do you feel like that recovery courts working hand in hand with nonprofits is a pretty good combination that can help the person do what they have to do to clean up the mess they made, but also get treatment and support at the same time? Do you think that's a pretty powerful combo?
I do. I think with the amount of community resources that we have to offer our participants, just that information gathering is the hard part for someone. So to be affiliated with an organization that has already made those connections is very strong.
So it sounds like what you're describing is teaching people to advocate until they can do it for themselves, right? Stand beside, come up alongside, meet them where they are. And where they are might not be a pretty place if it involves a courtroom or a jail cell, right? But you guys
exactly.
You guys come alongside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good stuff.
Yes.
Any other comments? All right, thank you, Rachel. All right, we're going to shift over to Scott. Scott, will you talk a little bit about faith? The value of faith in recovery, maybe sometimes some negative things that can come along with faith, or the way faith communities treat folks, or maybe how they could be detrimental instead of an asset to folks that are struggling. Just, if you will, talk about faith and how folks in the faith community can best support people going through these struggles.
Absolutely. And thank you for asking me to be a part of this panel this evening. And I apologize for coming in a little bit late there. So, I sometimes think about faith and I think about recovery, and I often think faith is important, but I also think that there's a lot of stuff. I think a lot of people, a lot of addicts and alcoholics have religious baggage, and I think, the churches have not always done a great job supporting people who are in active addiction. There's sort of the open secret of that church member, that woman's husband maybe, who's got a drinking problem, but no one really wants to talk about him or something like that. But there's a lot of talk and a lot of prayer, but there's not a lot of assistance. And prayer's important. Prayer's great. There's no, certainly not criticizing any of that. But sometimes I don't think that really serves to help someone get out of active addiction, right? I believe too that I believe, going back to a lot of what Polly was talking about, is stigma. All right. I think stigma really is sort of a thread that runs through a lot of this for us too. It's from some personal experiences. I remember trying to help a group of an Alcoholics Anonymous group that I was involved with several years ago find a new place to meet. And, Alcoholics Anonymous meets in lots of church basements, right? But certain churches are not very open to that. I remember a specific church here in Johnson City and asking if we could meet there. And they said, no, we have 3 meetings a week at church. We don't think we need to do anything like that. And I'm like, okay. And then another church that I called to ask, the person said, well, can't they just stop? I'm like, can't they just stop drinking? And I'm like, that whole Just Say No campaign from the 80s didn't work. But I didn't feel like it was my job to educate the people at those organizations about what we do. I found another place for us to meet. But I'll never forget that. That was fairly early in my recovery. But I also think too, there's that external thing, but inside the mind of the addict and alcoholic, right, is that feeling of intense separation. And I've worked with a lot of alcoholics and addicts, and I know from personal experience that is pretty much a universal thing, is that feeling of separation. And I had a friend of mine in the 12-step world, and that's the tradition I'm out of, right? In the 12-step world, who use the word ism, or the term ism. I separate myself, ISM. I separate myself. My friend Marty, who's passed away back earlier in the spring. And I always think about the alcoholic or addict feels very separated from friends and family, from the community, but the alcoholic and addict also feels the separation from God, right? And what I think the 12 steps do, what I think the 12-step community does, is try to help a person find that notion of God, right? Now, that's also, I believe, the mission of what the church wants to happen as well. But I think a lot of folks, due to some cultural stuff, right, are not able to understand exactly what they're hearing when they go into a 12-step type of recovery program. And the idea, especially in our rural culture, of having a God of your understanding is not always something that's particularly welcomed. It's supposed to be the God of the dominant of the religion's understanding, and I don't think that sometimes there's allowed room for that. But I always tell folks, just stick around. When 12-step world talks about the God of your understanding, they really do mean the God of your understanding, and you're really allowed to have whichever one that you want, definitely. I know, and I'm not really talking about faith-based recovery programs. I don't have any experience with those. I know that there's the celebrate recovery, and I know that that's a big thing. And I don't know anything about religiously affiliated organizations that have gotten people sober. I just know about the people who I've worked with in my experience. I do know that in my experience too, early in my recovery, and when I came into recovery, I would have considered myself an atheist, right? And I think that goes back to a lot of the stigma, the internalized stigma that I had, and the notion that, I can't be an alcoholic and an addict and have a relationship with God. I am so separated from all of that. That's just must not be there, right? Doesn't sound very logical, but probably none of this sounds very logical. And I remember, oddly enough, the very first person that I chose as a sponsor in my early recovery turned out he was a minister. So here I am, an atheist, and I picked a minister as my first sponsor. And I remember very specifically trying to talk to him about being an atheist, and how was I going to be able to do the 12 steps? How was I going to be able to be in recovery? Because that was the recovery that was presented to me through that world. How was I going to be able to do it? I don't believe in God. So I ended up having to give him a ride home one evening, and I made sure it was almost time for him to get out of the car, because I didn't really want to engage in the discussion, but I just wanted to hear something from him. And I said to him, I'm having trouble with the God thing. And I said, I just am not sure I believe it. And I just looked at him with a puzzled look. And just as he got out of the car, he says to me, and I won't even try to emulate his voice, he said, it's about learning to trust what you already know, right? Learning to trust what you already know. And I looked at him and I thought, that's useless. I don't know what he's talking about. And so the longer that I stayed clean and sober, there's a line in one of the Alcoholics Anonymous book, and it talks about that deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God, right? And that it may be obscured by a lot of things, by our own arrogance or whatever, but it's absolutely there for all of us. And I think for me, the 12-step world and that connection through a higher power has been a key for my long-term sobriety, right? I absolutely recognize that that's not for everybody. I absolutely recognize that there are plenty of people out there who are able to get sober through their religion and their church. I have had family members who have done that, right? I think they've had to overcome some stigma within their church and their religion, but I also think that it's quite possible. I know plenty of people who have just been able to stop using and have been able to piece some sort of life together through other spiritual means as well. But I think for most alcoholics and addicts, there's probably sometimes somewhere who gets clean makes some sort of sojourn through the 12-step world and the 12-step programs. And I think that one of the things they do best is sort of help people who have become disillusioned with organized religion find a way to have a relationship with some sort of higher being, a God of their understanding, and to allow people to sort of rebuild that. And I certainly know that that's been my experience throughout the years that I've been clean and sober. But a lot of the folks that I work with just feel so much stigma, and they don't feel like they fit in anywhere, and the church would be one of the places that they certainly don't fit in. And so that's about all I have to say on the topic for now.
Thank you, Scott. Will you touch on one more thing that just kind of came to my mind while you were talking?
Of course.
Kind of the value in taking each program for what it is, and not necessarily saying faith-based programs are this or 12-step programs are this. We just kind of talk about that a little bit, and about recovery options that, could look differently with a similar name, kind of.
Yeah, and I think there is the 12-step world, right? And I think the 12-step world does a very good job at teaching a lot of the tenets that are in that the church also teaches, right? I think there's the Celebrate Recovery movement, which I think is huge, and I think that works well for a lot of folks. Otherwise, too, though, I have some folks who have gotten sober through doing yoga and meditation, and following something like yoga is a spiritual path as well. And I know it's not always as familiar to the 12-step folks, but following the yogic path to some sort of sobriety is a real deal, and all of these things sort of can mix all together. I think you can practice several different things. And I also think too that for folks in medication assisted treatment, I don't always think that the 12-step world has done could probably do a little bit better at accepting folks in medication assisted recovery and letting those folks have an easier time finding a higher power in their rooms as well.
Thank you, Scott. Anybody else on the panel want to share their thoughts about faith or anything else that Scott mentioned?
I'd like to put in a pitch for what Scott just said and what you just said about setting up favorable circumstances for a man or a woman who feels 100% outside of humanity and outside of the grace and mercy of anything loving and unseen to come on back home. I think we sometimes as a community put up barriers and don't even know it, So I was blessed to have spiritual advisement that allowed me to, she grew up in recovery in an agnostics meeting in San Francisco. Her name is Audrey. Some of y'all know her. She's a Church of the Brethren kind of Christian all the way. She didn't have any investment in how I interacted with the God of my understanding. She just knew I had to go figure it out. She said, you'll go from having a get you God to getting you a God. And she said, I don't know what that looks like. And so people who allow me the grace to go figure it out, GOD too, for some of y'all who are maybe not in the world of recovery lingo, GOD, this is how we word it for newcomers: group of druggies, group of drunks, gift of desperation, good orderly direction, right? Grow or die, great outdoors. And we do that because we meet people where they are, right? We meet people where they are. And if they end up being Christian, awesome. If they end up being Buddhist, terrific. If they end up patting trees and saying, oh, whatever, let's just not drink and use and go have a good life. What do you say, right? But here's the deal. It takes a whole lot of personal confidence to stay in my lane right there and let you be you and do your thing, right? And let me be me and do my thing. And I think we get tangled up. Recovery works on attraction rather than promotion, right? Or attraction rather than promotion. And then I think it's great that the faith-based community has gotten involved because that mobilizes tens of thousands of people. I've watched that faith-based movement come across Tennessee under Dr. Monty Burks. It's a great thing to watch. That means more people have an opportunity to get help. Does it mean all people are going to get help that way? No. But some of them will, right? So it's not a one-size-fits-all deal. It's not a one-size-fits-all deal. The one-size-fits-all deal will kill people. No way, it does kill people. It not will, it does. So, allowing people the grace to have their space to meet their creator is good recovery. It's good stuff, Scott. Thank you.
And this is Sherry Barnett, by the way. Yes, John, I am going to speak. But anyway, I think that also we need to recognize too that Scott and Kim are very open. And I think both have taught me a lot about being more spiritual and not religious. because here in the Bible Belt, you cannot deny religious trauma. You cannot deny the fact that when you go to your church or your pastor and you ask for help and they say, just quit doing it, you're sinning, that creates a trauma in itself. I'm one of the hardcore, when I first got out into my recovery, I am not a 12-stepper, but I get to listen to Scott and Kim a lot, and John and all my peeps. I am a smart recovery person. I am a science-based person, a nurse practitioner, mental health type person. But I've suffered a lot of religious trauma. And so did my son, who's gay, just from being different, for me being in a having substance use disorder. And it caused, I think maybe my recovery would have been better, quicker, sooner, had someone just said to me, I get you, let's get help, instead of, well, you're not praying hard enough. Does that make sense? We have to, I believe in our faith-based community that we have, and Sullivan County Anti-Drug Coalition has started a faith-based initiative too, to where we start educating faith-based and religions and different places throughout the county to partner with people, but to also understand that addiction is a neurotransmitter disease. It is not a moral failing. And you tell someone they're a failure for so long, and I can guarantee you that they'll never find recovery, because you've given them that sense that, what's the point? I'm a failure anyway. So I feel very strongly about that, because I have been religiously hurt, and I just wanted to throw that out there. And I am very grateful to Scott for helping me soul search and do a lot of self-recognition that my higher power is my higher power. And so it's kept me in touch with my higher power. So, okay, that's it for me. That's all.
I'd like to add something there. I appreciate what Sherry Barnett said. Sherry and I are old friends. The idea of going to a pastor or a person in the faith community saying, well, it's, we'll pray for you. It's a sin. Why don't you just quit doing that? God doesn't want you to do that, and that's diametrically opposed to how the 12-step world looks at, it looks at it as a disease, right? Not as a moral failing. And that's, like I've heard some people say, we're not bad people trying to get good. We're sick people trying to get better. And I always appreciate hearing that. And I appreciate hearing from you, Sherry. Thanks. And Kim.
Thank you all. Anybody else on the panel with final thoughts on faith?
Jillian, can I jump in?
Yes, come on.
All right. I want to preface this by saying that I am not a Christian. I don't go to church on Sundays. That is not my path. But when I was getting high, there was a lady that actually works with Sherry over for the Sullivan County Anti-Drug Coalition, who runs a Celebrate Recovery group over in Kingsport. And she's like my second mom. She put up with a lot of my shenanigans growing up, and she always showed me kindness. And I would go to their CR meeting, and I would be so high, I would be shooting to open the bathroom, and just someone that was undesirable. And they showed me love. They would send me home with food because I didn't have any money to buy anything, because all of my money was going towards dope. They didn't push a religion on me. They showed me grace and mercy, and I couldn't appreciate it when they did it. And then I get clean, and I got clean through AA. And if you would have told me that I had to believe in Jesus to get clean, I would have probably left right then and there. But the 12-step world accepted me for where I was at, and they said, we want to work on getting you a pathway to get hooked up with a spiritual connection. And my life has forever changed from that. And there's bad people in the faith-based community. There's bad people in the 12-step groups. And we drop the ball at every corner, but there's also people there that do really, really, really good work. And I've had to deal with a lot of churches for us to be able to get meetings in, and those people, believe it or not, there are some of those people that will fight for us, stand up for us, and they're our biggest cheerleaders a lot of times behind the scenes, and we don't even really recognize that. And I know sometimes the faith-based community gets that we stigmatize them in recovery, and it's not fair to them, because they do a lot of good, and there's so many of them that want to love on us and see us do well. And it breaks my heart to see these people get a bad rep when they do nothing but go out of their way for us. And I loved what Scott said about all of the different avenues and paths that we can get. And it's really, Scott nailed it on it being a separation. And when we can feel a connection, whether that's through faith-based, the 12 steps, yoga, however we go about getting clean, the connection is such a strong thing. And I just wanted to say that I'm really, really grateful that there are some great faith-based groups out there that go out of their way to look over me shooting up in their bathroom.
Thank you.
Real quick on the end and just say, like, the thing that kept jumping out to me when everybody was speaking was, the word love. And, this meeting sort of seems to be like all the different ways we can think of to transmit love to people, and all the different ways people are going to receive that type of love. Scott, I think you mentioned Marty a minute ago, and I have to say, one of the most profound things that she taught me was that love is free. She asked me first when we were sitting there, she had her yellow pad out. She was like, Polly, what is love? And I wanted to say, baby, don't hurt me. And she said, no. I said, love is trust. She wrote that down. I said, love is tolerance. She wrote that down. I said, love is compassion. She wrote that down. Love is loyalty, whatever. I said all these like synonyms or whatever that I thought was love. And then she looked at me and she scribbled all over the paper. Those were all wrong, and she wrote next to them, expectations. Anytime we try to define what love is with another human being, we are setting ourselves up to get hurt. We are not perfect. No other human being is perfect. And when I put an expectation on someone to be loyal to me, what I'm doing is actually giving that person an opportunity to disappoint me. Very well deserved. What I need to do with the love she was trying to teach me was, that is free. That is what I learned from my higher power, whatever that is, religious or not. And I wrote in the chat box a minute ago, thank you to Scott and Kim, because when I was a brand new person in recovery, I think Kim was picking up like a decade clean or something crazy, but she showed me with her actions and her compassion what that love was. And if I had never been to church before in my life, then I wanted to go because of somebody like that. And I think that, as far as stigma goes too, that's our responsibility in the recovery community. My job is to show you love in the way that you are going to best receive it, regardless of what I actually believe. So that's what I got from that.
Thank you, Polly. Anybody else? Final thoughts on faith? Okay. Lisa, are you back on with us? I don't know if she's here or not. Okay, we'll give her another minute and we'll go on to our next question, which is for Polly and Sherry. Will you all talk just a little bit about genetics? So why, as a person who has been impacted by substance abuse, do you think it's important to have conversations with your kids, for other folks to have conversations with their kids about these hard topics, and what does that look like for you?
Well, for me, it's it's not optional for me to discuss it with my kids because they were as much a part of that illness as I was, and the consequences of that. Actually, my actions and my disease kind of umbrellaed them and sucked them in. I will tell you that so I celebrated 6 years clean last Friday. So that would have made Josh, he turns 15, that would have made him 8 or 9, knew exactly the manipulation techniques that I used in going to get my drugs, where I was going. When I got them, I would fall asleep in the bathroom, and he would know to come wake me up, and he knew, and so did my oldest child. I think it's important that we don't undermine our children or our adolescents, because I'm telling you, the more knowledge they have about what is wrong with us, how it happened, what our recovery looks like, we give them the opportunity to be resilient, right? We've heard that term before. My oldest child has a number 6 on an ACE scale. That puts him at like a 300% risk rate of being substance use disorder. I will tell you, as a science-based person, that I was so pissed at myself for being an addict that I did have my genetics tested. And there is an allele and a hereditary component that they theorize that promotes depression and also promotes substance use disorder. I will tell you that my family members above me have been alcoholics and suffered from substance use disorder. I believe that I have an ingrained trauma. We've heard that you can have trauma and put it on someone through life, that when you have a child that they're already ingrained with a certain amount of trauma. I've read an article about that. But the point is, yes, genetics play a role. If it doesn't play a role, conversations are still important. If you don't want to believe that there is a genetic component. I believe that truly children are just smarter than you give them credit for, and they may be the one. That's why I teach Narcan to adolescents and high schoolers. I also teach ACEs to high schoolers. So when I teach that, I was sitting in Greenville with a class full of 10th graders and 11th graders. And we talked about the ACE. I gave them the questions they were to kind of think about them in their mind. And about 75% of the class, when we talked to them afterwards, were about 6 or higher. So, and the fear that they had in their eyes, and then we had to talk about resilience. They want to know, yes, they have no fear and they don't fear death and certain things like that. But we're growing up with a population, with a group of children that are seeing way more, just a lot more trauma than probably previous generations have, even though life was hard and things like that. So there's more drugs around them. So the conversations happen, and my boys, we talk. They went through therapy, they went through school counseling, and I don't get complacent with my substance use disorder, and I always have conversations with them, what's going on. As my son messaged me today, I tell them they can tell me anything, anytime, anywhere, no judgment. And I mean that, because if they're scared of me, then they're going to be scared to ask someone else for help. So there's no judgment, but I just think it's crucial that you have conversations.
Thank you, Sherry. Holly?
Yeah, I'm the child of an alcoholic. I tell my story a lot, and I grew up, with my dad being a daily drinker. And this was another misconception, because I thought, the alcoholic was like the violent, abusive, blow up, angry type. And that wasn't what I went through growing up. When my father drank, he just isolated, and he was just emotionally unavailable, physically too, so I grew up trying to fix him. And, I was one of those kids, I would say things like, well, if you loved me, you'd quit. Why can't you just quit? I would go in his fridge and I would open all his beers out and dump them out and put all the empties back. Gosh, as an alcoholic now, I'd have been so mad. But, you know, as like an 8 or 9 year old kid, I was like, oh, that's the solution. Just dump it out. And I would write these heartbreaking letters like, Daddy, please stop drinking, you know, these things. And I just never understood why I wasn't good enough, you know, for him to stop. My first experience with a 12-step group actually wasn't like AA or NA, it was Al-Anon. And that was something I was introduced to as a very young preteen. And at the time, you know, like my ability to understand what was going on, it just made me more angry with him and things like that. You know, I will say that my father has been sober since 2006, which is amazing. I never thought I would see that. And we have, you know, a great understanding of each other because of our individual recoveries and what we went through, because he was the dad of me when I was going through all my stuff, you know. I have learned with research, you know, that, which is, this might be astounding to some of you, but children of addicts are 8 times more likely to develop an addiction. 8 times more likely. But addiction is only 50% genetic, and the other 50% is basically like, you know, nature versus nurture, you know, poor coping skills and things like that. So, you know, just because someone might have a genetic predisposition to develop an addiction, it doesn't mean that they're going to. I've got a brother who's not one of us, you know, that blows my mind, but I'm really happy that he's not. And for whatever reason, you know, he had a different set of coping skills that I had when we were growing up. We had the same dad. We went through some of the same things, but we chose to deal with it in a different way. And that's okay. You know, and I want to make the distinction again about, you know, diseases and the stigma of that, because if you think of something like heart disease, which is also 50% genetic and 50% lifestyle, you know, diet, exercise, things like that, you wouldn't yell at someone or tell them they're worthless if they had a heart attack. You know, and diabetes, like adult onset diabetes, that's about 50% genetic and also 50% diet and lifestyle and things like that. So the more that we educate ourselves about what makes up a particular addiction, I mean, I'm not going to overthink it, why this, why that, you know, it is what it is now, but I can use the knowledge that I have to help prevent my daughter, my child, you know, my kids from sometimes making the same choices that I did. And just like Sherry said, I've taught my 13-year-old how to use Narcan. You know, I've raised my stepdaughter from birth, and she's got 2 biological parents who both suffer from addiction. And she's seen really terrible things growing up, you know, and I also have taught her, and I'll teach my other daughter, you know, like safe words or whatever. If she's somewhere in a situation that's not safe, she can text me something and that will let me know right away to go get her. Like Sherry said, judgment free. We've got to, you know, while there would probably be some consequences for her doing some things she shouldn't do, asking for help will never give her a consequence. So, you know, the more that we know, the better decisions we're going to make. I fully believe that now.
Thank you both. Anyone else on the panel, thoughts about genetics or conversations with your kiddos?
My parents had the conversation with me. I don't have children. I was somebody's kid. I am somebody's kid. They had the conversation with me. My mother, when I was about 15 and I was already down the road with it, said, you know how it is with your dad, and not saying the words, you know, it goes, you know how it is with your dad's parents, your grandparents, right? You know, it's not good, and all this kind of veil. Well, I thought I would be different. But I will say this, my father died with over 30 years clean and sober. He had a profound walk with Christ. Okay, it worked for him. And he spent the rest of his life making the violence and all that right. You know, so I got to see him at his worst and I got to see him at his best. So when I work with men and women who have children and have a lot of guilt, shame, and remorse about that, okay, nobody can go back and redo whatever they've already done, but they get to watch you recover. So when it came time for me to stop, and it took me a long time to stop and stay stopped, the only person that I ever knew who stopped and stayed stopped was my dad. So he showed me how to do it wrong and he showed me how to do it right. When I do groups on this topic, I believe in the 3 H's: heredity, habitat, and habits. Goes along with what Polly and Sherry were saying. A couple of those things I can do something about, and my genes are my genes. My genes are my genes, but those other 2 things, I can do something about that, So it's good stuff. And I appreciate y'all weighing in on the science and the genetics, but I think don't despair. Just because you got it doesn't mean your children will get it. It doesn't mean they'll get it. You can set up different circumstances for their lives. You might not be able to control the outcome, right? But you can set them up to maybe not go down that road. Or if they, God forbid, go down that road, you know the way back. You know the way home either way, right?
Thank you, Kim. A little shameless plug here about this. This is something that I'm so passionate about, is really having open and honest conversations with kids about ACEs and about trauma and about substance abuse and about families and about all of these things. And so we started with Sherry a couple years ago training kids to use Narcan, and got some publicity last year from the New York Times about this. And so many people were just outraged that we would ever consider teaching a kid to use Narcan. And it was such an interesting journey for me, because while with my whole being, I wish that this was something that no kid had to know about. It's not reality. It's not reality in Carter County, and I dare to say it's not reality across the rest of the state. And so even that, to me, kind of ties back to that stigma piece, because we have to be willing to not say, oh, that's those people and something that they deal with. That's not something I deal with. Because it's all of us, right? And one of the things that I say to our kiddos as we teach this so often is, if you tell me you're not around somebody that does this, you're telling me you don't go to Walmart, and you're telling me you don't go to McDonald's, and you're telling me that you're not in our community, because then you are around people. And so I can't say enough about how important this is, and about the power of not underestimating kids. They know what's going on in their families. They know what's going on in their schools and in their communities. Don't underestimate them. I would much rather my kiddos have the words to use, know what they're seeing. And we've had a couple instances that have come back and told me that they actually were able to use their Narcan in different situations. One being an elderly neighbor who had dementia, and I feel like could have had a very different outcome. And so to me, those are the stories that we always have to keep in mind when we're thinking about our kiddos. I am always the biggest advocate in the whole world for teenagers, and how amazing they are, and the things that they can do, and the things that they know, and how often we don't give them enough credit. And so if at any time I can ever be of help in that area, in helping families create messages for their kiddos, or helping kiddos talk to their peers, or whatever we can do, please feel free to reach out to me. It's, again, something that I absolutely love to do, and think can be really a game changer for a lot of our kiddos. So. Okay, now I lost my place because I started talking about all that loving teenager stuff. Sorry about that. Okay, we are going to throw it to Kim Crowder to talk a little bit about empathy. So I hope lots of y'all have seen that amazing Brené Brown empathy versus sympathy video. I'll pull it up at the end of this if anybody hasn't seen it. But empathy is so important. Talk a little bit about what changes you think we maybe would see if folks were more empathetic, less judgmental, sort of more willing to meet folks where they are, and how do we make that happen?
Okay, so let's, I'm cheating and I'm looking on Google and just to get a baseline empathy definition for us to go on. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. In the 12-step world, we say this, we seek to understand rather than to be understood. How would it look if we had more empathy? I mean, everything would be better, right? We would have harm reduction on a massive scale, right? Maybe not as much violence, maybe not as much ignorance, maybe not as much bullying, maybe not as many people in jail, maybe not repeating the cycle over and over and over again. I think the process of being empathetic is probably learned. Probably learned or innate, unlearned, and learned again. I don't know, but I know this. To be empathetic, I have to want to be empathetic. I don't know how to love people till I learn how to love people, and I can't actually love people till I've let them love me, and so it's circular there, right? I worked with someone who considers herself a healer, I suppose, and she told me that if I was going to be any good with anybody, that I should learn to put my eyes and my ears on my heart. And in my mind, in my twisted mind, I said, well, that kind of makes my heart look like Mr. Potato Head. What's up with that? Because I'm going to deflect with a little humor there, right? But no, if I can put my eyes and my ears on my heart, well, let me tell you, it works. It doesn't mean I can always hear it and see it, but I've got a chance. My sponsor, Audrey, of many years, has on January 1st of every year, she has a mantra she comes up with. It's her meditation for the year, and it's usually something pretty short. And so I asked her in March of whatever year, I said, what's your mantra this year, Audrey? And she said, open my heart. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. Let me tell you something. Once you ask the higher power, the universe, the God of your understanding to open your heart, you are not in charge of who comes in there. I'm telling you, you're not, and it's good, but it makes it stretch and it makes it hurt and it makes it leap, right? So what would a world with more empathy look like? Golly. I mean, Jillian, and I was telling Scott about an idea Jillian has for the Butler Bridge, and feel free to chime in, Jillian. We went across the Butler Bridge today on the world's longest drive. Anyway, that's a pretty popular place for people to end their lives, correct, Jillian? I think she's out there.
Yes, it is.
And so she thought that perhaps we might, as a coalition, Carter County Drug Prevention Coalition, come up with some sort of plaque or marker, the most common location, with some sort of statement that might buy somebody some time to make a different decision. I'm all about buying people time. I'm all about that. So empathy says, I want you to have the same chances at a life second to none that I got. There's plenty of recovery to go around. It's not going to run out. There's plenty of Narcan, and there's plenty of recovery. There's my Narcan plug, Polly and Sherry. There's plenty of it to go around, but empathy's hard. If I'm drinking or using, you won't be getting empathy from me. If I'm clean and sober, you at least get me wanting to be empathetic, you know, and occasionally get a shot at it. It's a good question, Jillian.
Thank you very
Mom,
much.
you have another bag.
Yes, my children are home, if you did not notice that.
Mom, you have another
I was gonna
bag.
show you all, so we actually had our sign put up on the Butler Bridge that Kim mentioned. So shout out to T-Dot, they're rock stars. And allowed us to put up 2 signs that say, hey, get off this bridge because somebody cares about you. And so just to kind of, I don't know, I'm so super proud of that. And I hope that for somebody that makes a difference. Yeah. So our next question. Again, I get distracted when I start talking about these things that I am all passionate about. Okay, Rachel. Oh, no, wait, hold on.
Go, go.
I totally skipped your question, Scott and Craig. So sorry about that. Let's go back to Scott and Craig and talk a little bit about gender. So gender stereotypes, some reasons that maybe men in Northeast Tennessee are less likely to reach out for help or less likely to seek treatment, and maybe some things that we can do about it.
I'm going to definitely defer to Craig to lead off on this one for sure.
I was hoping to defer to you, Scott. I'll give you an example from last night. My mom was a school teacher in Sullivan County. She just retired like a month ago because of the coronavirus. And there's a kid that she taught in school whose aunt worked with my mom, and she's been telling me about this kid for about 2 years. That he needs help, and I always tell my mom the same thing: give him my number, and I'll do anything I can to help him. And he was very drunk and wanted to tell me the same thing over and over and over again for about an hour last night. And I was asking him about, do you want to go to treatment? I can help you get into treatment. We can go right now. And what he said was a typical male thing is, I can't lose my job. I've got a family to support. And then when I try to break down those walls of, well, you're not really doing the best right now, you could be a better provider if you get the help, then it comes to men in general. We're arrogant, and we think that we can do things on our own, and we don't like to get vulnerable. And not only does that hurt us from getting treatment, because we don't want to have to say that we're weak, because that's what we think. We're weak. And even though that's the furthest thing from the truth, we'll tell you we're weak, or I want to prove to myself that I can do it on my own. And through time and time again, I fail from being able to do it on my own, because I suffer from a disease which I have to have humility, and I have to have some people that are willing to help me. And and it's hard for me to accept that about myself. So, and then another thing that happens is I've sponsored a whole lot of guys in 12-step programs, and I've listened to a whole lot of 5th steps. And I've listened to, and if for those of y'all that don't know what a 5th step is in a 4-step I write an inventory, and in AA it deals with resentments, fears, and sex. And to piggyback on what some other people have said earlier, there's a lot of trauma, and a lot of people don't want to get honest and vulnerable about the things that have happened to them in their lives. And as men, we don't want to admit that something atrocious might have happened years and years and years ago, and we don't want to get vulnerable with that. And in my experience, we want to hold all that stuff in and keep it to ourselves, and we think that one day we're just going to be able to power through it, and we're going to become better just magically with perseverance and pushing through the hard stuff, when deep down in our soul we want help, and we don't know how to get it. And at some point and sometime, somebody's broke our trust, and we don't want to give anybody else a chance to hurt us again. And it's call it a coping mechanism, call it whatever you want to. I don't work in the mental health field, so y'all have got these fancy words and slogans that I don't know, but I call it arrogance and insecurity. The arrogance to think that I can do it on my own, and the insecurity of, if I let you try to help me, you're going to hurt me. And I think one of the best things that we can do, especially as someone in recovery, is to let them to come off of things that makes us vulnerable. Because when I can get vulnerable with someone, then they feel more comfortable to get vulnerable with me, and then we can connect, and they know that I've went through some things that as Kim was talking about, that maybe they can have some empathy for me, and then maybe they'll let me be able to show them some empathy in return. And another thing is, it's really easy to persuade John Q. Public that, hey, let's help these women. And we got programs for women out the yazoo, and which is great. We need those programs. But I mean, we want to go and rally around the pregnant woman. We don't really want to rally around the man that's working. It's a lot easier sell to say, hey, let's help this woman get out of this shit situation that she's in, than to say, hey, let's love on this man. Because part of our culture here teaches us that men should be able to do it on their own. Pull up your bootstraps, son, and get it together. And it's probably not a popular topic, or probably not a popular thing to say, but y'all can talk bad about me later, that's fine, but it's just the truth. And we need more people to rally around our men, and then that way we build better men, which builds better families. And I loved what Polly and Kim were talking about. They get to watch their dads get sober, and I think to my little girl about, she gets to watch me get sober, and she gets to see me become a dad. And I miss out on all that stuff if I don't get vulnerable with anyone. And we need healing, and we need love, and we need to love on everyone, just not just the people that it's the easiest to love on. And with that, I'll give you Scott, who's going to do a way better job than me.
There was a reason I didn't want to start first, right? Thank you. I don't have anything really to add beyond, but I will say, we have come a long way. 100 years ago, people didn't believe women could be alcoholics, right? Or addicts or whatever. So I think we've come a long way from that, right? I think that we're able to see now that it's no respecter of gender expression, right? So, but I also think too, yeah, there are a lot of programs for women, and I'm grateful that we have those. Women have been historically underrepresented. We also have, I believe that sometimes the stigma is worse. And of course, obviously I'm not a woman, right? But I believe that the stigma is probably worse. The addicted mother, right? The term crack whore. We don't have an equivalent expression, I think, for the male equivalent of that. So I think gender plays a big part in all of this. So I think it's stuff, there's a lot in this. And I think that men, it is harder, I think, for men to acknowledge that they need help, right? Because men are supposed to be, well, big and strong and never to have any problems and never to cry and all of that. But obviously that doesn't work very well, right? So I appreciate what Craig had to say. Thanks.
Thank
As
you.
a not guy, I don't even play one on TV, but I worked for a bunch of dudes called MDs. And one of them said to me years ago, women are sick, but men are dead. And I put in the chat box, historically, and take your generalization for what it is, but men are not taught to tell the truth about how bad it hurts. The last time I did an ACEs presentation as a continuing ed event at the College of Medicine, I did this title of Show Me Where It Hurts, because I had a memory as being a child at a pediatrician's office of the doctor getting down on my level and looking in my eyes, and I was little, saying, show me where it hurts. If you think about when kids are little, a little girl falls down, she starts to cry, they pick her up and love on her and dust her off. Dude falls down, little dude falls down. Suck it up, son. Suck it up. And let me tell you something, that is some serious programming. you know? And some of the beautiful miracles of recovery I've seen in the rooms are men who will sit and cry with you. But those tears didn't come easy to those dudes. And women who get backbones of steel. So, you know, it all comes back around. We get what we need. The guys learn to heal and deal, and the women learn to be made of steel. You know, if we stick around and we help each other out. But men are dealt a different hand. If women are between a rock and a hard place, men are between a rock and a soft place. Still, we've come a long way. We've come a long way, but you know.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel have thoughts about gender roles?
I will say I truly believe that women do probably deal with much more stigma around the disease of addiction than men. I mean, I don't know, comparing that across is probably not very helpful, but I think sometimes society is especially cruel to women who are addicted and who have a substance use disorder.
Thank you. Grateful for both of you being willing to just talk about that. I think, again, starting conversations is really the goal, and being able to say, hey, this is hard for lots of people in lots of different ways. So thank you both. Okay, Rachel and Craig, if you all would talk a little bit about the value of and importance in folks in recovery in the workforce. So we know there's some stigma around that, around hiring someone who has maybe struggled with substance abuse. And so can you talk just a little bit about why it's important to be willing to hire folks in recovery, and kind of what that maybe looks like?
Okay, I'll take it off first. So employment with our participants in the program, we try to instill characteristics in them that make them employable. So maintaining their sobriety, learning accountability, these are all things that are going to make them an asset to a company. And with our program, there are some challenges with scheduling. There are some things that are mandatory court appearances that make it hard to work, you know, typical 9-to-5 jobs. But we have been really lucky with partnerships with various agencies that employ our participants and give them a chance. I think that's about it I've got.
I'm going to give you guys two stories. One was when I first got clean. Rachel, were you done?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, I just cut her off and not realize it. When I first got clean, I knew how to work in restaurants and I knew how to sell drugs. Those were the two talents that I'd had. I got clean when I was 32. And I wasn't very good at either. I was a whole lot better at doing the drugs than I was at selling them. And restaurants, because I did the drugs so much, I was too busy doing them to be a good employee. And when I first got clean, there was a guy who came into Magnolia Ridge to do an H&I, which is a hospitals and institutions thing. And he came in to talk to us, and I got out and, I went to the meetings. I did what people told me to do. And he called me up and said, hey, do you want a job hanging sheetrock? And I said, I've never hung sheetrock. I don't know anything about sheetrock, but I am more than willing to show up, and I'm grateful for the job, and I'll be there early and I'll work hard, and thank you for the opportunity. Well, the first day that we were hanging sheetrock, he says, okay, so we're going to put it up here. We're going to shoot the screws into the sheetrock on the studs, and then we're going to hang this next piece. So he drew me the little line of where I was supposed to shoot him down at. And first day on the job, I put a screw into the water line of this apartment. And I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm like, man, I'm killing it. I've got this piece of sheetrock hung up and it looks great. And so I turn around and I'm helping them hang another one. And then I look back and I say, Steve, why is this water stuff coming out of this sheetrock? And he says a few choice words I probably won't share on here. And he said, take it off, take it off, take it off. So I take the sheetrock off, get it down. The water's shooting out everywhere. They just had one water line for this entire apartment complex. So we had to shut down the entire water for this apartment complex for like 3 hours before the plumber can get there. And I felt about this big. And I was like, I can't do anything right in life. Here I am trying to get my life together. And I just screw it all up. So I leave work that day and I come home and I feel terrible. And that man called me that night and he said, what time are you going to be here tomorrow? And I said, man, I'll be there at 7:45 because I knew he wanted me there at 8. And I showed up at 7:45 that morning. And that man showed me kindness of what someone in recovery is supposed to treat another person in recovery like. And I worked for him for the first 2.5 years I was clean. I had to remodel my house last year, and because that man, I knew how to do that. I knew how to put flooring down. I knew how to frame a wall. I knew how to hang sheetrock. I knew how to paint. He taught me all of those things, and he didn't give up on me. And I'm not an emotional dude, and I'm sitting here tearing up because I'm thinking about the impact that had on my life and the impact that had on my recovery. And I'm going to tell y'all a second story and I'll shut up. I sponsor a guy who is also not a very emotional dude. And he's about this tall and he barks a lot. And he was entitled, but when he got out of treatment, he'd burn all his bridges. And he took this job at the Dollar General. And mainly because it was the only place that would hire him at the time. So he took the job at the Dollar General making $7.50 an hour. While working there at the Dollar General, someone approached him about taking a job at White's Construction in the warehouse there, making $10 an hour. So he took that job at White's Construction, making $10 an hour just as a hand. Now, he worked his way all the way up in the warehouse, and he hires other guys in recovery. There's 5 of my best friends that work at this plant, and they've all blossomed, and it's because somebody somewhere has been willing to take a chance on us, and we show up and we bust our butts and we do a good job, and we work our way up. And the most beautiful thing about that is where I work, we only hire people in recovery. That's like we're not working you if you weren't a drug addict at some point. And what I hope to see happen is that when us drug addicts, we get in a place to where we got a little bit of say so, we don't forget where we've come from, and we go back and we pull these next guys up and say, hey, do you want a job? And I'll teach you a trade. And when they screw up their first day, hopefully not putting a screw in a water line, but if they screw up on something, I get an opportunity to love on them and tell them, hey, it's going to be okay. Let me show you how to do this better. And in my personal life, the kindness that someone showed me from giving me employment when I was unemployable and teaching me how to be the things has been revolutionary to the man that I've become today. So I'll sit here and talk to you guys for 2 hours about the importance of employment. Nobody wants to hear that, so thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I love to hear you talk about this because I think it is so important. And I love the way that you can connect the dots in your life and see how valuable employment was to changing your story. So thank you both for sharing. So I wanted to kind of wrap us up on a note, not of sadness or overwhelmedness, I don't think that's the word, but kind of a note of what happens now. So we've heard all these stories and met all these amazing humans that are living this life. And so what do we do? And so Sherry, will you talk a little bit about what folks can do locally in our region to prevent overdose, to sort of change these stories, and to make a difference?
So the 3 talking points that I go away with from any training is 1, every person is valuable. You are no further in your substance use disorder that we can't lend you a hand and help you climb out. Reach out to somebody somewhere sometime. It may take you more than once. I get that. Number 2, show empathy. Be open-minded in learning about addiction or substance use disorder. I'm trying to change my language, so you'll hear me go back and forth. I will tell you that give someone a chance through a job. Alice McAfee gave me a job, Sullivan County Anti-Drug Coalition, and I have become one of the top ropes people, I would like to think, in the area, and try to work the hardest that I can for her. I will also tell you that be aware of what harm reduction stands for. Harm reduction is keeping people in substance use disorder or in risky behaviors alive and healthy until they can find long-term recovery. And that does include needle exchange systems. Be smart. It helps stop HIV, Hep C, Narcan. You may think you will never come across someone who's overdosed, but by George, you go to Walmart, restaurants, stores, have open conversations with your children and adolescents. I, for one, never thought that it would be a group that I would, even though I'm a family nurse practitioner, never thought kids were my thing, and Jillian taught me different. I actually love them, and they are so brutally honest and not afraid to ask true questions, good questions. But get involved in your community, give someone a job, open your mind a little bit, just a little bit, and help us educate. And just, that's all I can really say. And if you know someone's suffering, give them my number, give them Craig's number. I know Kim's number. All of us get calls all of the time. Polly's number, any of us that are in recovery, everyone that has spoken in this panel, I can guarantee you has the passion to help anyone. I can guarantee you that they will show them empathy and love, because Jillian doesn't pick just anybody to hang out with. So if you need Narcan, if you want Narcan education, I will come to you, no matter what county, wherever you need it. I will do social distancing. I can do seminar type Zooms. I can do stigma reduction. I can also do a whole class on harm reduction. We need it in our area. So just know that you are loved, and that if you're suffering from substance use disorder and you're on this call, man, we love you and you are worthy, and everybody holds value. And if you don't believe me, ask our little Lisa, the person that we spoke to at the very beginning. That's all I've got, guys.
Thank you, Sherry. So we will now take some questions. If there's anything you all want to know that we haven't talked about, feel free at this point to unmute yourselves and ask, or put them in the chat box. I'm happy to ask for you.
Some of us have put our numbers in the chat area. I know Polly did, I did. If you have a question, you don't want to ask it here. If I don't know the answer, I'll get Kim or Polly or Scott or Craig. We all lean on each other. So my number's in there if you need to know anything. So
Any closing thoughts from our panel?
the panel, probably we would all be dead if somebody didn't show us empathy at one time. How many of the panel agree with that? Exactly. So
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks for sharing and being willing to put your stories out there, and know how very much I appreciate you all as always. And thanks to everybody who hopped on tonight. Hope that you can take something away from this that will be beneficial to you, and let's just all go love each other and save the world. Good night.